The evening was just beginning at the grand city banquet hall. Soft golden lights glowed from crystal chandeliers, and the sound of laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses. The place looked beautiful. Tables covered in white cloth, candles flickering, and the sweet scent of freshly cooked dishes floating through the air. Guests were arriving in their best clothes, smiling, greeting one another, and talking excitedly about the night ahead. Among the busy movement of waiters and staff, there was one girl who stood out, though not because she tried to. She moved quietly between the tables, her black uniform neat and her hair tied in a low bun. She didn't speak much, but whenever someone looked at her, they noticed something calm and steady about her eyes, like she carried her own little world inside. Her name was Lena. Lena had been working at the banquet hall for almost 2 years. She wasn't the fastest among the staff, but she was careful, polite, and always did her work without complaint. Her co-workers liked her for her kindness, though they didn't know much about her life outside of work. She often finished her shift, took the late bus home, and spent her nights taking care of her mother. No one knew that before all this, Lena had dreamed of something completely different. Before she ever picked up a tray or tied on an apron, she used to play the piano. Not just play, it had been her life, her passion, her one true joy. As a child, she could sit at an old upright piano for hours, lost in sound. Her fingers seemed to move on their own, discovering melodies before she even knew what they meant. Her father used to say she was born with music in her blood. He wasn't a musician himself, but he loved hearing her play after work. He would close his eyes and say, "One day people will pay to hear you, my girl." But that dream had been interrupted years ago. Her father passed away suddenly when Lena was still in school. Her mother fell ill soon after, and the family's savings quickly disappeared on medical bills. Lena tried to keep her dream alive. She practiced on an old keyboard and even won a small scholarship to a local music program. But when her mother's health worsened, she left it all behind to work full-time. Now the piano was just a memory. Sometimes when she passed the grand piano in the hall, a glossy black instrument that sat near the stage for live performances, her heart would ache a little. She always looked away quickly, pretending she hadn't seen it, but her hands, those hands that once danced across the keys, still twitched softly whenever music played. That night, as she moved around the room, she heard a man rehearsing on that same piano. He was one of the professional musicians hired for the evening party, and his fingers glided smoothly as he ran through scales and light jazz tunes. Lena slowed down for a second near the stage, balancing a tray of empty glasses. The notes were warm and beautiful, and for a moment she forgot she was at work. Her eyes softened and her lips curved into a faint smile. The music carried her back, to a small room with peeling wallpaper, to her father's proud face, to evenings where she would practice until the sky outside turned dark blue. Then the sharp voice of her supervisor broke her thoughts. "Lena, don't stand there daydreaming. Table 6 needs water refilled?" She blinked, nodded quickly, and hurried off. The music faded behind her as she returned to her duties. The night continued, busy as usual. Guests kept arriving, and the waitstaff moved like a well-practiced team, serving drinks, clearing plates, and staying out of the guests' way. Lena stayed quiet but observant. She always noticed little details: a guest who needed a napkin, a child who dropped a spoon, a couple who looked lost trying to find the restrooms. She fixed these things before anyone even had to ask. "Lena, you're too soft," her coworker joked once during a short break. "You smile even when people are rude." Lena had only laughed. "Maybe they're just having a hard day," she'd said simply. Her coworker shook her head. "You're strange. I'd have snapped at half of them by now." But Lena didn't mind. Being kind made her feel better about the things she couldn't change. Still, sometimes she wished she could do more than just serve food and smile. At night, when she returned home, she often looked at her mother, sleeping peacefully in her bed, and whispered softly, "One day, Mom, I'll play again." Her mother, when awake, always encouraged her. "Lena," she would say, her voice tired but gentle, "you have something special in your fingers. Don't let the world make you forget." But life had a way of keeping people busy surviving instead of dreaming. By the time the clock struck 7 that evening, the banquet was in full swing. Music filled the air, laughter echoed through the hall, and the smell of roasted dishes drifted everywhere. Lena moved carefully among the crowd, placing plates and glasses, her expression calm and focused. Every now and then she glanced at the pianist on stage. He played effortlessly, fingers moving like water. Guests clapped politely after each song. The piano itself gleamed under the soft lights, and Lena could almost feel the cool touch of its keys under her fingertips. She sighed quietly and kept working. After a while, she found herself near the back of the room refilling coffee cups. A group of older guests were talking loudly about their children's achievements. Someone had graduated, another got promoted, another traveled abroad. Lena smiled politely as she poured, but inside, she felt a small sting of envy. She didn't want fame or wealth, she just wanted to feel proud again, to know she was still good at something. As she turned away, she accidentally brushed her hand against a small decorative vase on the edge of the table. It wobbled dangerously before she caught it just in time. "Careful," one of the guests snapped. "I'm so sorry," Lena said quickly, bowing her head. The guest muttered something under her breath, and Lena quietly walked away, heart beating fast. She hated making mistakes, but she couldn't help it. She was tired. She'd been working long shifts all week, and her hands ached from carrying heavy trays. Still, she didn't complain. She needed this job. It paid for her mother's medicine, their small apartment, and food. Every time she wanted to quit, she reminded herself that she didn't have the luxury to dream. Later that night, when the pianist took a short break, he left his sheet music open on the stand. Lena passed by the stage carrying a tray of used glasses. Her eyes fell on the music and her steps slowed. The notes on the page looked familiar, like an old language she once spoke fluently. Without realizing, her lips moved as she read them silently. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side. Remembering the rhythm, she almost smiled. "Pretty, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Lena turned to see one of the servers, a cheerful young man from the kitchen. He'd noticed her pause. "Yes," she said softly. "It's very pretty. You play?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded faintly. "A little." "Long ago," he grinned. "Well, better you than me." "I can't even clap on beat," Lena laughed quietly. "It's not easy to forget music," she said, half to herself. "Even when life makes you stop." The young man didn't really understand, but he smiled anyway and went back to work. As the night went on, Lena kept catching herself glancing at the piano. It was almost magnetic, the polished surface, the open lid, the shining keys. It called to her in a way nothing else did. After midnight, when most guests had left and the staff were cleaning up, Lena found herself alone near the stage again. The lights were dim and the piano sat quietly in the corner like it was waiting. Her heart beat faster. She looked around, no one was nearby. She placed her tray down and slowly walked up to it. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the piano's glossy surface. She reached out and brushed her fingertips against one of the keys. It felt cool and smooth, just as she remembered. She pressed it gently and a soft note filled the air, small but clear. She froze for a second, listening. Then, without thinking, she pressed another key, then another. A tiny melody formed, simple but beautiful. It was one she had made up as a child, a tune her father used to hum when he was happy. The sound echoed quietly through the empty hall. She smiled, eyes glistening. For a brief moment, it was as if time had turned back. But then she heard footsteps. Lena quickly pulled her hand away, straightened up, and picked up her tray. Her supervisor entered the room carrying a clipboard. "Still here, Lena? Go home. We'll finish the rest tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am," Lena said softly, bowing her head. As she walked out, she glanced back once more at the piano. It stood there silently, shining under the faint light. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment, those few notes in an empty room, were just the beginning of something far bigger. For now, she went home as she always did, tired but thoughtful. On the bus ride back, she rested her head against the window, watching the city lights blur by. Her hands rested on her lap, but her fingers kept moving slightly, tracing invisible notes in the air. And somewhere deep inside, the music she had buried years ago began to stir again, quietly, like a seed waking after a long winter. The party was already in full swing by the time Lena had returned to work the next evening. The soft hum of conversation and laughter filled the air as guests mingled around the banquet hall, their bright clothes creating a sea of color in the warm light. Lena moved smoothly between the tables, balancing trays of drinks, plates of appetizers, and napkins with a grace that only came from years of practice. She had grown used to this routine. Her days were long, filled with carrying heavy trays and smiling politely at guests, many of whom never even noticed her. The work was exhausting, but it was steady, and as long as it allowed her to care for her mother, it was enough. Yet in the back of her mind, Lena couldn't help but think about the piano again. It had been on her mind since last night, when she'd stood in front of it and played that small, forgotten melody. She had barely been able to control herself, the music bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. The sound had been just a whisper, but it had felt so right. But tonight was different. The piano was occupied. The hired pianist, a middle-aged man in a well-tailored tuxedo, sat at the grand piano, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. He played classical pieces, the kind you might hear at a fancy event like this one. The guests clapped politely after each song, some nodding appreciatively. Lena moved through the room, taking orders and making sure every guest had what they needed. But her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. She couldn't help it. There was something about the instrument that called to her. Her supervisor, a no-nonsense woman who ran the evening shifts, watched her carefully from across the room. Lena knew she had a reputation for being quiet, perhaps too quiet. It wasn't that she minded, she didn't need the attention. But her supervisor often found ways to push her harder, testing her patience and her limits. "Hey, Lena," her supervisor called out. "Table 4 needs more wine. Move faster, please." Lena nodded quickly and walked over to the table. She had learned to work efficiently over the years, and she did it without complaint. But tonight there was a restless feeling in her chest. Her fingers itched to play, to create something beautiful again. She almost felt guilty for even thinking it. This wasn't the time or place for such thoughts. The evening wore on, and the crowd began to grow louder. The laughter of guests, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of music filled the hall. As Lena worked, she noticed a change in the mood of the guests. People were starting to get a little louder, a little rowdier. There was a buzz of excitement in the air. Lena, who had seen her fair share of corporate parties, recognized the signs. A few too many glasses of champagne had been consumed, and the guests were beginning to relax. She moved between the tables, offering refills and keeping an eye on the crowd. That was when the host, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, approached her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice casual but with a hint of authority. "We seem to have a problem." Lena stopped what she was doing and gave him her full attention. "There was supposed to be a musician for the evening," the man continued, glancing over at the piano. "But he's running late. He was supposed to be here by now." Lena nodded, understanding the situation immediately. There was nothing more embarrassing than a party without the music to keep things lively. "Well," the host said, glancing around nervously, "I need someone to cover for him until he arrives. Do you know anyone who can step in?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to get involved. She had seen what happened when people tried to improvise in these situations. It usually ended in disaster. But then, the thought of the piano caught her again. I can play a little," she said, almost before she could stop herself. The host raised an eyebrow. "You can play?" Lena felt a sudden rush of warmth rise in her cheeks. Just a bit," she said, trying to sound casual. "I used to play when I was younger." The host eyed her for a moment, and for a second Lena thought he was going to laugh her off. But instead he smiled. "Good enough," he said, then turned toward the pianist. "We just need someone to keep things going for a while." "Can you do it?" Lena was stunned. She hadn't expected it to be this simple. She thought he would have called someone else, maybe a professional, but no. He was looking at her, waiting for an answer. She opened her mouth to protest, but then stopped. The music, that sweet, aching melody she had once known so well, was right in front of her. She could feel it calling to her. It felt like a chance she couldn't ignore. "Okay," she said, her voice quieter now. "I'll do it." The host clapped his hands together. "Great, just go up there and play something, anything. We'll get the crowd warmed up." Lena took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was about to do. As she climbed onto the stage and sat at the piano, the guests turned their attention toward her. They had been talking, laughing, and eating just moments before, but now they were all looking at her. She could feel the weight of their eyes, and for a moment she almost froze. But then she placed her hands on the keys. The cool surface of the piano felt familiar under her fingers. For a second, everything else faded away. the guests, the noise, the pressure. She closed her eyes and let her hands find the first few notes. It was a simple scale, nothing special, but it felt right. Her fingers moved naturally, remembering the rhythm, the flow. The crowd was quiet now, watching her intently. Lena didn't know if they expected something amazing or if they just thought she was filling in for a few minutes. Either way, she didn't care. Her focus was entirely on the music. She started to play. Slowly at first, letting the notes fall one by one, she built the melody up. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing like she hadn't in years. As the melody grew more complex, she could feel the tension in her chest begin to ease. It was like rediscovering a part of herself she had buried for so long. The music flowed from her fingers, and for a moment she forgot where she was. She was no longer a waitress, no longer a woman who had given up her dreams. She was just a person with music in her soul, letting it out into the world. The more she played, the more she realized how much she had missed this. She had forgotten how freeing it was, how the world seemed to disappear when she was lost in a piece of music. The sound of the piano filled the hall, and it was no longer just background noise, it was alive. The guests began to stir. Some of them leaned forward, intrigued. Others exchanged surprised glances. There was something about the music, it was raw, it was real. And it was coming from someone who didn't seem like a performer. She was just a young woman who had been pulled into this situation by chance. But it didn't matter. The music spoke for itself. As she played, she lost track of time. She had no idea how long she had been at the piano. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the sound she was creating, the way it filled the room and seemed to make everything else fade into the background. When the final note rang out, the silence that followed felt heavy. Lena opened her eyes, her fingers still resting on the keys, and looked up. The room was still, and then, as if on cue, the guests erupted into applause. The sound was loud, warm, and filled with surprise and admiration. Lena's heart raced in her chest. She had expected them to be polite, maybe clap a little out of obligation. But this wasn't just politeness, it was genuine appreciation. She blinked, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't expected that. The host, who had been watching from the side, came up to her with a broad smile. "That was amazing," he said. "I had no idea you could play like that." Lena just smiled, still trying to catch her breath. I haven't played in so long," she said, her voice soft. The host looked at her, his eyes wide. "Well, you should definitely play more often. You've got real talent." Lena didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this. The applause was still ringing in her ears, and for the first time in a long time she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt seen. For a brief moment she let herself believe it was real. That maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for her to do what she had always dreamed of. The applause faded slowly, but the echo of it lingered in Lena's chest. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt something like this, acknowledged, admired, even appreciated. It wasn't like the polite claps she was used to when guests cheered on the staff for doing their jobs. No, this was different. This was real. Her fingers still rested on the piano keys, lingering on the final note, and for a brief moment she forgot where she was. The room, the guests, the hum of conversation, it all seemed distant. She had entered a place of quiet contentment, a space where she felt whole again. But soon the reality of the situation pulled her back. The host, still smiling, stood beside her, a bit too eager, like someone who had just found a hidden treasure. "Lena," he said, his voice full of excitement. "That was incredible. I honestly didn't expect that. You're a natural." Lena's heart was still pounding, and she felt a small blush creep across her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a bit embarrassed. "It's not every day we get someone with that kind of talent just stepping in to save the day," he continued, clearly impressed. "What else can you play? Can you do more?" The question hung in the air, and Lena was unsure how to answer. She hadn't planned on playing more, let alone for an audience. It was just supposed to be a quick, simple performance to fill the gap, but now the whole room was looking at her expectantly. I'm not sure," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't played in years." The host waved it off, not seeming to mind. "Doesn't matter, you should keep going. Show them what else you can do." Before she could respond, he turned to the crowd, raising his voice to gather their attention. "Everyone, our pianist has returned to the stage. Let's hear more from her." Lena's stomach twisted. The eyes of the room were suddenly on her again, and it felt like the walls were closing in. She swallowed, looking down at the keys. She could feel her hands start to shake. What was she doing? She was just a waitress. She hadn't played in so long. She wasn't ready for this. But then, in the midst of her panic, something strange happened. She looked up just for a second and saw a small group of guests at the back of the room. There was an elderly couple, their hands clasped together. Their faces were warm with smiles, their eyes full of kindness. And there, standing beside them, was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, with wide eyes full of wonder. The girl was staring at Lena, her gaze full of hope. She looked like she believed that the woman at the piano could make something magical happen. And that, more than anything else, made Lena pause. She wasn't playing for the crowd or for the host or even for herself. She was playing for that girl, the one who believed in the beauty of the music. With a deep breath, Lena turned back to the piano and let her fingers find the keys once again. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a performance, it was a moment of connection. She began with something simple, just a familiar tune that she used to play often when she was younger. The melody came easily, like a forgotten friend, flowing from her fingers. The sound filled the space around her, warm and inviting. The guests seemed to settle in. A few murmured to each other, a few raised their glasses, but everyone's attention was on the music. The laughter from before softened, as if the room had become quieter, more reverent. Lena's fingers moved with more confidence now. Each note came with ease, and she began to weave a song she hadn't played in years. It was an old piece, one her father used to hum when he was happy. She hadn't realized how much she missed it, how much it meant to her, until she started to play. The melody lifted her, and with it her memories came rushing back. She remembered the quiet evenings when she would sit at the piano, the sound of her father's voice filling the space as he played the role of her biggest fan. She remembered the joy she had felt when she first started composing her own music, when everything felt full of possibility. The room around her disappeared for a moment. There was only the music, only the sound that wrapped around her like a blanket. She didn't know how long she played. 5 minutes? 10? It didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing what she was meant to do. The guests had stopped talking entirely, their eyes fixed on her. And she, in turn, was lost in the music, each note carrying her further into something she hadn't even realized she missed so much. When the last note faded into the quiet, the room was still. Lena opened her eyes, unsure of what to expect. She had been so wrapped up in the music that she hadn't thought about the crowd. And then the applause came. It started soft, like a whisper, and then grew. It was not the polite clapping she was used to, but something real. Something heartfelt. The host, still smiling, clapped the hardest. "Incredible," he called out. "That was beautiful. You have no idea how much you've just impressed everyone in this room." Lena's heart fluttered in her chest. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction. She hadn't expected anyone to truly appreciate what she was doing. A few people came up to her afterward, shaking her hand and offering compliments. One older woman, a guest who had been sitting at the front, looked at her with shining eyes. "You should be on a stage, my dear," the woman said softly. "That was breathtaking." Lena smiled shyly, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft. The host came up to her, his excitement still bubbling. "You know Lena," he said. "I've been in this business a long time, and I can tell when someone has real talent. You should be performing more. This isn't something you should just hide away." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest. The praise felt so foreign, so different from the constant stress of her everyday life. She was used to working hard, to being invisible. But now people were noticing her not as a waitress, but as a musician. I don't know," she said, her voice hesitant. "I haven't played in so long. I don't think I'm ready for that." The host didn't seem to hear her doubts. "Don't sell yourself short. We need talent like yours. You deserve a chance to be heard." Lena couldn't believe it. a chance to be heard. She'd been so focused on surviving, on taking care of her mother, that she had forgotten what it felt like to dream. The young girl who had watched her with wide eyes earlier approached her now, holding a piece of paper. "Can you write your name here?" the girl asked, her voice sweet and innocent. Lena smiled, surprised. "Of course." She took the pen from the girl's hand and wrote her name on the paper. The girl beamed and ran off, her little feet tapping against the floor. Lena didn't know what had just happened, but she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was the music, or maybe it was the way she had been able to connect with someone, even in a small moment. Maybe it was just the spark of something new, something she had been missing for so long. The host was still talking, still excited about the possibility of her performing more often. But Lena wasn't listening anymore. She was lost in the quiet hum of her own thoughts. Could she really do this? Could she really step into the world she had left behind and chase the dream she had buried so long ago? For the first time in years, Lena felt like it was possible. As the evening wore on, the guests slowly began to leave, the chatter and laughter slowly dying down. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something deep inside her. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something she wasn't ready to let go of just yet. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about finding her way back to the one thing that had always made her feel alive, the music. As she cleared the stage and started to pack away the empty glasses, she realized that she was no longer just a waitress. She was something more, something she hadn't been in a long time, and that, she thought, was only the beginning. The days after the party were a blur for Lena. She still couldn't quite believe what had happened. The music had come out of her so easily, so naturally, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something more than just the grind of her daily routine. She felt alive. Back at the restaurant, it was business as usual. The work was hard and the hours were long, but Lena noticed something different now. She felt a sense of quiet purpose that she hadn't experienced before. There was still the same pile of dirty plates to clear, the same constant shuffle between tables, but now she found herself humming under her breath, something she hadn't done in years. Her hands still remembered the rhythm of the piano, and sometimes, when she had a quiet moment, she would close her eyes and let the memory of the music carry her away. The sound of the keys, the smooth flow of the melody. It was as if her fingers were trying to find that place again, that place where everything made sense, but at the same time doubt lingered in the back of her mind. The night she had played at the party had been a fluke, hadn't it? She was just in the right place at the right time. She had never intended to perform. She had never planned on playing for a crowd. What if it had just been a lucky moment? Still, every time she sat down at the piano at the restaurant, her fingers itched to play again. There was a small, dusty piano tucked away in the corner, a relic from the restaurant's early days. It hadn't been touched in months, maybe even years, but the keys were still there, just waiting to be played. On one quiet afternoon when the restaurant was mostly empty, Lena found herself standing near the piano, her fingers grazing the edge of the keys. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the next step, to really embrace the idea of music again. But then she heard the soft creak of the restaurant door. A few guests had arrived, and she quickly snapped back into waitress mode. She couldn't afford to be distracted. There was work to do. As the evening wore on, the usual rush of customers arrived. The restaurant buzzed with the familiar sounds of clinking glasses, clattering plates, and the low hum of conversation. But Lena couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Her supervisor noticed her distracted state and shot her a curious look. "You all right, Lena?" Lena nodded quickly, giving a small smile. "Just fine." Her supervisor didn't seem convinced, but didn't press the issue. Instead, she pointed to the bar. "Can you check on table 6? They need another round of drinks." Lena walked away, but the urge to play lingered. She couldn't shake it. The idea of returning to the piano, of trying to find that connection again, filled her thoughts. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Later that evening, after the dinner rush had died down, Lena found herself alone in the quiet kitchen. The hum of the fridge and the soft sound of the dishwasher were the only things breaking the silence. Her supervisor had left for the night, and most of the staff had gone home. Lena made her way to the corner where the piano sat. She touched the dusty keys, feeling a quiet excitement in her chest. This time she wasn't doing it for anyone else. This time it was just for her. Her fingers gently pressed down on the keys, testing the sound. It was rusty, but the music still felt good. She didn't try to play anything complicated, just simple scales, letting the notes fill the air. The sound was soft but soothing, like a whisper of something forgotten. She closed her eyes and let the melody take her away. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of playing. There was no pressure, no audience, just the music. The door to the restaurant opened again, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. She quickly opened her eyes, her hands freezing on the keys. She hadn't expected anyone to be here at this hour. It was the host from the party. He stood in the doorway, his eyes lighting up when he saw Lena at the piano. "I thought I heard something," he said with a grin. "I didn't realize you were here." Lena's face flushed, and she quickly pulled her hands away from the piano. "Oh, I didn't mean to—" No, don't stop," he said, holding up a hand. "I was just enjoying the music." Lena hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I didn't realize anyone was here." He walked closer, his eyes still on the piano. "I love hearing live music. It's what makes a place like this special, don't you think?" Lena nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I suppose." There was a long pause, and for a moment Lena didn't know what to say. The last time they had spoken, she had been so caught up in the nerves of performing that she hadn't really thought about what had happened. But now, in the quiet of the restaurant, with the music still hanging in the air, it felt different. The host broke the silence. "You know, I've been thinking about you since the party. You've got real talent, Lena, I mean it." Lena smiled awkwardly, still unsure how to respond. "I'm just a waitress," he shook his head. "That's not what I'm talking about. You've got something special, something you shouldn't just hide away." She looked down at her hands, unsure of how to handle the compliment. "I don't know if I could—" He didn't let her finish. "You don't have to decide anything right now. But what if you gave it a shot? What if you tried performing more?" Lena shook her head. "I don't think I'm ready for that." "I haven't performed in years." The host smiled gently. "You don't have to start big. Maybe you could play here in front of a small crowd, just to get your feet wet. You've already got the music inside you. All you need is a little push." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had never considered performing again. Not seriously, anyway. It felt like something too far out of reach, something only other people could do. But the way he spoke so casually and confidently made it seem possible. "I don't know," she said, her voice trailing off. "It feels like a long shot." He stepped closer, his expression kind but firm. "You don't know until you try, Lena. I can help you. I'll make sure the right people hear you play. But it's up to you to take the first step." She thought about his words, the weight of them settling on her shoulders. What if he was right? What if she could actually do this? Lena had always dreamed of performing, of sharing her music with the world. But life had gotten in the way. Responsibilities, obligations, the fear of failure. It had all pushed her dreams to the side. She had convinced herself that it was too late, that it wasn't worth pursuing anymore. But now, standing here in the dimly lit restaurant, with the music still echoing in the air, she felt a spark. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe this was the chance she had been waiting for. The host waited for her to respond, his gaze steady. Lena took a deep breath, her fingers once again brushing the keys of the piano. This time she didn't pull away. She let her fingers press gently, playing a few quiet notes. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice soft but determined. The host smiled and nodded. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. You've got something special, Lena. Don't let it go to waste." As he left, the quiet of the restaurant returned, but this time it felt different. The music no longer felt like something distant. It was close, within reach. And for the first time in a long time, Lena believed that maybe, just maybe, her dreams could come true. She sat at the piano for a while longer, playing a few more notes. Each one felt like a promise to herself that she wasn't going to let fear or doubt stand in her way. She had a gift, and it was time to share it. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Lena wasn't going to hide from her music anymore. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of excitement and doubt. Lena couldn't stop thinking about what the host had said. "You've got something special," he had told her, and those words stayed with her long after he had left the restaurant that night. She found herself standing at the piano again more and more often, her fingers lightly grazing the keys, testing the sound. It was as if the music was calling her back, but each time she hesitated. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people laughed at her? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't playing for anyone else. She wasn't performing for the guests at the restaurant or for the people at the party. She was playing for herself. She was playing because it made her feel whole again. One afternoon, as the sun started to set and the last few guests trickled out of the restaurant, Lena found herself alone once more in front of the piano. The quiet of the space gave her a sense of peace, a moment of stillness that allowed her thoughts to settle. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody was familiar, a song she had played countless times as a child. It was simple, soothing, and easy to get lost in. As her fingers danced across the keys, the doubt slowly started to fade away. She had always loved playing, but over the years, life had gotten in the way. It was easy to forget what truly mattered when you were busy surviving. But now as she played, she remembered why she loved the piano in the first place. It was her escape, her way of expressing everything she couldn't put into words. Lena played for what felt like hours. She wasn't sure how long it had been when the door to the restaurant opened once again, and she looked up to see the host standing in the doorway. "I knew I'd find you here," he said, his smile wide and easy. "It's nice to see you playing again." Lena's fingers froze and she quickly pulled her hands from the piano. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still here," she said, her voice quiet. He stepped into the room, taking a seat at one of the tables nearby. "I wasn't planning on staying long, but I couldn't help but hear the music. It sounds good. Really good." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the piano. "You should play like this for people more often." Lena hesitated, feeling the familiar pang of uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said softly. "You don't have to be ready," he replied. "You just have to take the first step. You've already taken that first step by playing for yourself. That's the hardest part." She looked at him, unsure of what to say. He had always been kind to her, but now his words felt different. They felt like a challenge. Could she really do this? Could she really step onto a stage and share her music with the world? Before she could respond, the door opened again and a few more guests trickled in. The host stood up, his eyes glinting with excitement. "You know what?" he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "Why don't you play for them?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean it," he said. "You've got this. You've got the talent, the passion. All you need is a little push. You don't have to make a big production of it. Just play something simple. Let them hear what you've got." Lena's mind raced. She had never performed for an audience before. Sure, she had played for herself, for her family when she was younger, but this was different. The idea of standing in front of a room full of people, playing for them, made her stomach twist with nerves. But the host was looking at her with so much hope, so much belief in her that she couldn't help but feel something stir inside her. Maybe this was the push she needed. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. Taking a deep breath, Lena slowly stood up and made her way to the piano. The guests who had settled into their seats looked up at her, some curious, others eager. The familiar sense of nervousness crept back into her chest, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't doing this for them. She was doing this for herself. Lena sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, everything went silent. She could feel the weight of the room's eyes on her, but she reminded herself they weren't judging her. They were waiting to hear something beautiful. She started to play the same song she had played earlier that afternoon. It was simple, familiar, but it felt right. The notes filled the air, soft and steady. Her fingers found their rhythm, and with each note, the tension in her chest began to melt away. This wasn't about perfection. It was about expressing herself, about letting the music do what words couldn't. The room fell quiet as the music played. The guests were still listening, absorbed in the melody. Lena's fingers moved fluidly across the keys, her heart lightening with every note. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to impress anyone. She just needed to play. When the last note rang out, Lena slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her breath coming out in a soft sigh. For a moment the room was still. Then slowly, one by one, the guests began to clap. The applause wasn't loud, but it was genuine. It was warm and sincere, and it made Lena's chest swell with something she hadn't felt in years: pride. The host was the first to stand, clapping the loudest. "That was incredible," he said, his voice full of excitement. "You've got something, Lena, don't ever forget that." Lena smiled, a small, nervous smile. She had never expected this kind of reaction. She had been so focused on her own doubts and fears that she hadn't considered how powerful the music could be, how it could connect people. The guests all came up to her afterward, some offering compliments, others just shaking her hand in admiration. It was a strange feeling, this attention, this warmth, but it felt good. It felt real. As the evening came to a close, Lena found herself standing by the piano once again, her fingers gently brushing the keys. She felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she knew that she had made the right decision. She had taken that first step. She had shared her music with others, and it felt like the beginning of something new. The host came over to her before leaving, a proud smile on his face. "You did great," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "I knew you had it in you." Lena looked at him, her heart full. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything," he nodded. "I'm just glad you finally realized it too. You've got a gift, Lena, don't let it go." As the restaurant emptied out and the night wore on, Lena sat at the piano one last time. The keys seemed to hum under her fingertips, almost as if they were calling her back. She had found her way back to music, back to herself, and for the first time in years she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't know where this would take her, but she knew one thing for sure: it was the beginning of something beautiful.